city and from the county. So what I would suggest, and I don't know if I can do this on one motion or two, or if it's de facto for both, but I would recommend Mike Ortega as chair of this committee and Jan Lesher as vice chair, if they're willing to accept those awesome assignments.
I'm willing to accept. Is there a second? There's a motion and a second. Further discussion? Discussion? Hearing none, call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you for your vote of confidence. I do want to take privilege of the microphone and make a couple of comments about Chuck Huckleberry. As you know, he's not part of our committee any longer. He was one of the founding members of the committee many moons ago, and did an amazing job not only as county administrator, but also demonstrated leadership of the TMC and ultimately the RTA. And I just wanted to give him a shout out. I know he's covering well, and there were some Chuck Huckleberry sightings as late as last night, I understand. But we're glad for him and for his family. We're wishing him well in his new endeavors. But I did want to take a moment to recognize a true leader and, quite frankly, someone I consider a friend.
Just to reiterate that, and thank you all for the confidence. Again, it's a little daunting to follow a gentleman who's been the director of transportation as well as the county administrator for 29 years. So I appreciate all of your patience as I get up to speed on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
Mr. Chair, could I just thank you for recognizing Mr. Huckleberry's importance to the community. Hopefully he'll come back and be as important as he was on October 22nd of last year. So I'd just like to remind particularly the chair and vice chair about the constitution of this committee. And, you know, I was looking at some of our documents last night, and I looked at the bylaws and looked at the names that are on there. And it's pretty awesome. I look at the fiscal responsibility, particularly of the municipal members, and you're roughly $4.6 billion a year for the county and the cities as far as you're managing those particular budgets. I compare that with the 2.1 billion roughly for the RTA sales tax estimate. So for you guys, hopefully dealing with these issues is nothing. So I have confidence in you. The other thing we have, just to kind of put a dollar amount on it, given our membership on this committee, when we're here, and most of us are here, it's about $3,000 an hour of assets that you have available in your own time and the consultants and so on. And I think I estimated something like 40 college degrees that are here to help you. And interestingly, on July 4th, we celebrated 256 years, the birthday of our country. I looked at our project review task force, and coincidentally, that group has about 256 years of experience. We're not that old, but I just kind of wanted to mention the resources that are available to the RTA and to Mr. Ortega and Ms. Lesher as we move forward with the challenges of closing out RTA 1 and transitioning into hopefully RTA next. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Wood, for your comments. Appreciate that. Probably need your prescriptions as well.
After 5.
So before we get into the agenda, I wanted to say thank you for carving time out of your schedule. I had asked for this special meeting of the TMC really to just demonstrate a potentially different or more active role of the TMC in not only delivering RTA 1, but also preparing and supporting both the CAC as well as the RTA board and RTA Next. That's the spirit in which I asked Farhad and his team to see if we could get a quorum. So I thank you all for that. And as we go through the agenda, that's really the spirit under which I'd asked for this. So thank you for spending time with us. Okay, item 3, TMC meeting summary. Are there any comments on the meeting summary?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mr. Ortega. I really only have one addition, and that is on agenda item number 5, which dealt with the projects potentially moving to RTA Next. And I'm going to read the suggested changes. Well, I'm going to read the whole thing. Basically, it's the last paragraph. and then I'll tell you why I'm suggesting it. Following the discussion, the motion was made by Mr. Jim Shane that the TMC accept 2 of the 3 recommendations from the task force on projects RTA 13 and 14, those with respect to technical changes and scope reduction only. The task force third, this is the change, the task force third recommendation to move the projects to RTA Next was specifically rejected. In addition, the motion as revised recommended that RTA move forward with additional RTA-sponsored public outreach for the projects and then bring the results back to TMC for further discussion. The motion was seconded by Mr. Terry Rosema and unanimously approved another change by the TMC quorum in attendance, including both co-chairs of the Project Review Task Force. And I think that really clarifies the intent. The intent, I think, was to essentially replicate the process of Broadway with Broadway corridor scope revisions. And the minutes as written didn't quite get to that. It's clear in the video, and I'm hoping that these modifications are okay, and that this wording can get back to the RTA board. Thank you.
Okay, so is that in the form of a motion with that amendment to the minutes?
Yes.
To the summary?
Yes.
Okay, so there is a motion to accept the minutes as modified and read by Curtis. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second on the floor. Further discussion on the meeting summary as modified by Dr. Wood. Here are none, call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Move on to item 4, which is the approach for ranking the RTA Next submitted project list. And Bucky and Josh will make a few opening remarks. So, before we move on, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and everyone doing all right. Before you dive into the actual ranking exercise, I just wanted to briefly go over the RTA Next, just a recap of where we are with the RTA Next process. This is information we also shared with our Citizens Advisory Committee, and I believe some of this information you received in your email last night. So where we are right now is in phase 3, which is the new RTA plan development phase. And basically what this phase does is review and reduce the number of submitted projects in coordination with all of you, the technical managers. This phase will also be aligning projects to meet the CAC plan development goals and also balance funding needs per element. So that will be based on the RTA board established budget. So at the last RTA board meeting, the board provided some direction to the CAC, which included that the deadline for the CAC to provide a recommended draft plan is July 1st of 2023, so that's a year from now. The CAC will also be considering the guiding principles and submit those outcomes of the discussion to the board before the next meeting, which is next month. They have a meeting on the 25th, so the CAC is being asked to provide that the week prior. Also, on June 20th, deadline for the CAC to provide a recommended draft plan is July 1st. The CAC will also be considering the guiding principles and submit those outcomes.
Hey, Terry, if you can hear us, I think we're going to try to mute you. There we go. Thanks.
Thank you. Due to the holiday this month, the CAC did not meet this week, but they'll be meeting on July 18th to finish those discussions. In the meantime, RTA staff, with direction from the board, will be coordinating regional public outreach for the draft plan after the board approves it for review and feedback. So during this plan development phase, the CAC will be reviewing the 108 projects submitted by the jurisdictions at the request of the board and by them. We've given the CAC the same ability in the database that we've all had to sort the rankings. The CAC will not be ranking anything at this time. They're just basically getting acquainted with the projects and reviewing them. You then, as the technical management committee, will then be providing technical feedback to the CAC as they move forward. And then information will be provided to the CAC from all of us, the staff, about ongoing review of projects for alignment with the RTA statutory requirements, and also with the board's policies and directives as needed for the plan development.
Can I just ask you a quick question while we're, so in terms of process, is it only the Citizens Advisory Committee that will be making a recommendation to the board? Or is it possible for a scenario to play out where the board actually sees a CAC recommendation and a TMC recommendation on the priority list? Can you fill that, answer that for me, please?
The board will be reviewing the CAC's recommendation along with your technical.
I mean, ideally, they would all kind of come together and it would be
Yes.
great, but I'm just wondering if there's that flexibility.
Well, the board will be reviewing both of your recommendations together. Is that what you?
So if I may chime in, I think if I understand your question, is it possible to have two separate recommendations? Yes.
I mean, we go through this exercise and we do our best to align everything, but at the end of the day, I'm wondering if there is a possible scenario where there are two different lists that the board is considering.
Yes, of course. Obviously, as you mentioned, the goal is to have a unified recommendation, work through the process, and then present one draft at that time. Hopefully, make it a little bit more easier for the board to make decisions. Obviously, again, it's possible if you do not agree to have two separate recommendations go forward to the board. Thank you.
Can you? Yeah. Okay. So also during this plan development phase, the RTA board is going to determine and provide the CAC with the budget. This will be used to program funding for the projects in the draft RTA plan. And as you all know, the plan has to be fiscally constrained. So the budget's going to be based on RTA tax rate as well as any projected sources. The board is also going to establish the percentage of funding for each of the elements of the plan. And then they're going to confirm the anticipated non-RTA revenue sources that will supplement the proposed projects. They will also direct the funding set aside amount for the current plan overlap needs. That's something that we're discussing. And then they'll also provide direction on the possible use of RTA dollars for maintenance of any on the next RTA plan and any other direction if needed. In terms of the budget, the board is also going to determine an overlap funding amount in the first 5-year period of the new plan. So just as an example, the current plan ends in 2026. If a new plan begins in 2024 and continues through 2044 for that 20-year time frame, then the overlap period would be that 2024 through 2026 2-year overlap period. Also, the first period of the new plan, the first 5-6 years, may contain an existing and the rescope projects from the current RTA plan as well. The board will also develop a targeted budget for the proposed budget plan, for the proposed new plan based on anticipated mix of the new RTA revenue and committed non-RTA revenues. So as you all know, the overall cost of the submitted projects to date is approximately $4.6 billion. And then the anticipated available funding for RTA Next is about $2 billion. So during this process, the CAC is going to, again, review the projects as I mentioned earlier. They're having that access to the database. They're going to assess regional transportation needs. And then they're also going to determine which of those may be supported by voters. And then in the upcoming phases, the RTA board will then review the draft plan and approve it for public review and feedback. They're going to request plan revisions based on that feedback. And then they're also going to seek RTA member feedback and endorsements of the final draft plan before they approve it. They'll also set an election date for that plan and for the excise sales tax after they approve it as well. So that's just a quick recap of where we are with the process. More questions. Thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Poppy, when the CAC receives the funding estimates in terms of that $2 billion estimate, are they also going to get information on the approximate where some of that approximately is going to come from in terms of the communities? In other words, how much comes from Sahuarita, how much expected to come from Oro Valley, from the unincorporated areas, that sort of thing.
Yeah, they'll have the opportunity to start to see the allocation once the board, provides them that. And as they're reviewing the projects, and that you're also going to have access to the rankings that you've been providing. So they'll start to see where all of the jurisdictions can out there. Thanks.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Packy, has there been any consideration of a range of values, particularly on the revenue forecast? To me, it's a bit of folly to say that the forecast one number. When we went through this the first time, almost 20 years ago, we had a member, Oscar Rothenberg or something like that was his name. And he was very adamant about doing things in ranges, particularly when you have as much uncertainty as we have here. And to me, it seems like something that the board might want to consider in this process at some point, rather than saying we have revenues of $2 billion, to say we have anticipated revenue between 1.8 billion and 2.2 billion, and then have projects on the list so that there's some flexibility to adapt to that change in actual revenues accrued. And it could be a change in revenues on the non-RTA side as well. So, dealing with things on a 20-year horizon and making them fixed is very difficult unless the other intent is to go back out maybe at 5-year intervals and totally reevaluate the plan, kind of like what we do with the TIP, and reevaluate the RTA next as a plan that's kind of viewed in sections. And I don't think any of the things that I just mentioned are inconsistent with the statute, but it's kind of a new way of looking at things and would possibly prevent us from getting into a trap of fixed numbers during great time. We're on really great times of uncertainty now.
Go ahead and finish your thought and then I'll add to your.
No, I was just gonna say, as long as they're constituent statutes and the RTA board, it will be up to their discretion to see, because as we all know, in the last RTA, there was a recession that occurred, so I think everyone's learned a lot from that experience, and I think that when they receive the work with the Eller College for forecasting, that they will be looking at all of those issues that you brought up.
Great, thank you.
And just to add to that, so I think what you're pointing out is more on the expenditure side, not so much on the revenue. We already have the range of revenues, and the board has that obviously picture in front of them. So the question becomes, do you develop a budget based on the range of expenditures as well? I think that's what you're saying.
Well, I'm saying both.
Well, the revenue already do that.
Right.
They have that.
Yeah, but that's not presented to the voters. That's my point. The voters need to see that there's some uncertainty.
I agree. So on the expenditure side, then that's what you were referring to, that are we able to put a plan together that has that flexibility on the expenditure side as well,
Right.
as actual revenues are realized and you adjust your expenditure.
Right.
And that conversation has been taking place at the board level.
Good.
Going back to what Mary just said earlier. So they're going to come back and say, here's the number to use and potentially here's the range for expenditure.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I wanted to add that the CAC has discussed fairly briefly, but on multiple occasions, that it desires there to be a resilient plan put forward. And for that, they're talking about having the flexibility, as was suggested, of perhaps re-examining, perhaps providing a built-in methodology for dealing with shortfalls or windfalls, if you will, of funding changes in scope desired by jurisdictions, but those kinds of course changes, if you will, or course corrections at various times during the 20-year period, in order that we recognize, as happened in this first 20-year program, that a number of economic and technical and technological advances and changes and regressions all have occurred, and we're still not so much stuck, but we're still operating under that framework that was developed back in 2006.
Very good. Other questions or comments? I'd like to go back to the schedule slide. I'd like to go back to that schedule slide. slide of those.
We're in number 3.
No, I think it's, no, it's the next one after this. That, up to 2 minutes. That's okay, 2 minutes. Just back one. There you go. No, that's not it.
You want with the July 1st date on it?
Yeah, it's got the July 1st, they keep going back on there. So I just want to maybe dissect this a little bit for us and the roles that we plan to support both the RTA board as well as the CAC. So the overall goal, it sounds like, is to have a draft plan in front of the RTA board by July, so a year from now, basically. Clock's ticking, Tom and Caroline. So that's the overarching goal right now. To get there, there's conversation around guiding principles and having a conversation around what that will look like at the August 18th meeting. And so when I'm sorry, the August 25th meeting, but it has to be its due date. So part of the conversation, I think, is how we might be able to help with that and provide. I know that there was some discussion, at least my memory a little foggy on our role originally, but I think there is an opportunity for us to dust off that conversation for those guiding principles to have, again, in support of what you all are doing, Tom and Carolyn. So I wanted to dissect that a little bit and suggest that to the TMC that we may want to dust that conversation off and again, take on the role of support to get this, obviously accomplished, but in front of ultimately in front of the RTA board, not from us, but from the CAC. So that's a thought, Tom. I throw that out to you, Caroline, for your commentary.
Yeah, I'll say that it is our intention to send those guiding principles and goals to the TMC for feedback. We certainly want to see that, and because of the tight time frame here in getting this prepared, hopefully we can finalize at our meeting later this month. But in the event that we have to call another quick meeting at the beginning of August, our regular meeting at the beginning of August to finalize that, doesn't leave much time, obviously, for feedback and any kind of changes. So your comments may take the form of comments directly to the board, as you see those. But if we do have time for some feedback, for a feedback loop, that would be fine. And thinking about how difficult it is to get this group together, CAC with 33 members is probably no easier, but it would be, I think, helpful at least for us to get the feedback that we got last time, which was, although not formally from the TMC, as I recall, but it was feedback from each of the individual jurisdictions, and that would also be very helpful. And that may be the route to take this time, because individually, I think folks can probably gather their own brain trusts together to review and make comments. So far, the changes are not dramatic, but there will be probably a couple of new guidelines I can anticipate that will end up in there, and seeing your feedback on those will be helpful.
Okay, so again, it's really the opportunity for the TMC to provide support to the CAC as this very abbreviated iterative process to make sure that helps inform the board's ultimate decision on what those guiding principles would be.
Yeah, I think it might also kind of be a good practice run for the feedback loops that, and I say that plural intentionally, for project review. As we go back and forth, I anticipate that we will have specific questions and ask for some, perhaps even personal presentations from individual jurisdictions or from each jurisdiction, frankly, as questions come up regarding their own priorities, as well as trying to make comparisons between top priorities of individual jurisdictions that may seem to be either competitive or repetitive. And those will be the kinds of feedbacks that we need to make our feedback loop as efficient as possible for.
Very good. And Shane, I know you asked about the potential for 2 recommendations ultimately going to the board. And obviously, I think that's an opportunity. What I would like to hope is that there's one, and even if we have comments that maybe didn't get incorporated because of the compressed, I'm not talking just about the guiding principles, but also about the project delivery. I think that part of the agenda later is to talk about the frequency of us getting together, so we stay in more real time as opposed to recorder, dusting off our RTA notes and remember what we said and what we're supposed to do. So, I throw that out as just an opportunity, Tom, and maybe Carol, maybe there's an opportunity to keep going through it. The last bullet point, RTA staff direction board will coordinate regional public outreach for the draft plan. Does the draft plan for public outreach, is that part of the conversation that we're having with the TMC and the CAC? Or is that a separate?
So the draft plan is the work product of over the next 12 months. So by the time there's a product and a recommendation is made to the board, that's what we're referring to as a draft plan.
Okay, so my question is more specific to the regional public outreach. And is there a plan? So there's the plan, right? The document that has all the projects and the expenditures and revenue and all that. And then there's an approach to getting that information out, which is the public outreach. Is that a conversation that is there a plan that's discussed before it goes to the board? And that's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, if I understand the question correctly, it would be this process is between the committees, CAC, TMC, back and forth, recommendations to the board, direction back from the board. Ultimately, when there's a draft product that everybody says, all right, we like this, that's when you want to go out to the public and get feedback.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
Up to that point.
Okay.
What I'm talking about is the next step of the public outreach, because I think that the public outreach has to be done strategically for the region and will be a little different in Oro Valley than in Sarita and so forth. And so I'm clear on the draft plan. What I'm talking about is the public outreach plan and the conversations around that to get us to.
So we'll have a plan at that time for the board, and obviously we'll determine how the board wants to approach that. By way of example, last time we had a consultant who did all that work, and that was very extensive, very expensive and extensive.
So I would suggest, again, to the TMC and to the CAC that the TMC engage in that as well as the CAC, not necessarily to direct it, but certainly engagement in that throughout the process. Because I think that as we're going forward, the success of RTA Next is really the goal. And how we get there, there's differing ways. And I would be a little nervous about an outreach plan presented to the board without recommendations from the TMC and engagement, TMC and CAC, which is my thought.
One thing I just want to bring up that I think that we need to take advantage of our transportation professionals in each of our jurisdictions. And and I'm sure we're going to talk about the exercise that we just went through, this independent evaluation of everybody's project by jurisdictions was pretty meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Why? Because Shane, I don't know what your priorities are. I don't know how to gauge them again. So we did the best that we could. But as I understand it, and Paul Kiesler's here, and we've talked about this internally, I think there was a suggestion some time ago, even when projects were being submitted, hey, can we talk to our neighboring We talked to Marana about this one thing that crosses over county and I'm not gonna speak for Paul, he can speak up, and the response is, oh, no, you can't talk to each other about that. And you can't take over what the role of the CAC is, okay? I'm not trying to take over the role of the CAC at all. And I don't think that, but I will say this, we all have as government jurisdictions, we have boards and commissions. I have never once given something or had our staff give a blank sheet of paper to a board or commission, right? We provide them with the professional guidance and something to work off of. And I don't think, to my knowledge, and maybe Paul can speak up, that our transportation officials have been able to kind of have those conversations where there needs to be some coordination across jurisdictions in the form of, like, I'll take a perfect example. Moore Road in Oro Valley crosses through the county and crosses into Marana. There was no discussion or conversation about what would be that best approach for the width. Should there be a roundabout? Should there be, that kind of thing? It was no, just put your request in. Stops at your jurisdiction. And I think that's to our disservice, and frankly to the CAC's disservice, because they're kind of relying on what makes the most sense. And so how do we back up just a bit to make sure that that occurs where that cross jurisdiction needs to happen, so that we can give wise recommendations to the CAC for their consideration, and where we can also see concerns that we didn't think about as an individual jurisdiction. So, and Paul, I don't know if you want to add to that conversation a little bit.
He's got his hand up. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you all. Hard to add. Mary hit everything on my list here. As we had this assignment to go ahead and rank, it was incredibly difficult because the information was uncoordinated for all intents and purposes. We really need to look at regionally how all these projects tie together, or if they do tie together, or if Oro Valley thought of something that maybe may not have been on Marana's radar, but then Marana looks at it and goes, oh yeah, maybe that is something that we need to work together on. Or with Pima County. I mean, that's up in our Northwest world. Or understanding as we're ranking the projects, the Colossal Cave route, is that important to the county? For those of us in the Northwest, we don't really know. And I don't really want to give a ranking on something that I don't really have a lot of information on. I know there was some technical data attached to that spreadsheet, but there's regional conversations that need to happen. And I would say amongst the transportation experts with regard to, we're setting a framework for the region. And we understand in Oro Valley, many of our projects are regional in the Northwest region, but they might not be regional in the entire urban Tucson area. But that, again, those are conversations we really need to have. And handing the CAC recommendations, I don't think would taint the CAC's process at all. It's just another opinion that they're getting to help them kind of put the framework together to represent the public. That's really what I want to add on to that.
Thank you, Paul.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think there was a general sense of frustration in trying to prioritize the projects, and exactly what Mary was saying. Without a common base of knowledge about each of the projects, what are they intended to do, this issue of joint funding. If Marana submitted a project where they were going to fund it 90%, I'd say that's on the top of my list. So what I would suggest, since we have very little information about these projects and the jurisdictions want to hear what each others have to say, and recognizing that the TMC is primarily a jurisdictional thing, although we non-jurisdictional members can vote, we don't count in the quorum. It's just the jurisdictional members. I want to suggest that we have some kind of a workshop for the TMC, and maybe it's a joint TMC and CAC workshop. I'm not buying lunch. The government can do that. And the idea there is to have the jurisdictions present their projects. I think it's patently unfair to have anybody except the jurisdictions presenting their projects. They're the ones who have devised the projects, they envisioned them, they put them on the list. We just got to prioritize Frank yesterday. I'm saying now come and tell us a little bit more about that. Give us the details. So we understand how they work. Why are they regionally significant? That's really important. Cost sharing, if you have that, how does it relate to a future economic development versus future residential development in the community? Just a few things. And I think for each of these projects, it's probably a 90-second presentation on it. So, a couple of hours of presentation and a few hours discussion. I think we're going to get much more done than we would in 3 months of thrashing around separately. So, I would like to present that, what I just said, having a joint workshop, or at least individual workshops with presentations by the jurisdiction, that happens sometime soon, like within the next month. And if we can't do it because everybody is on vacation, we can either delay it or go to where they are. But either one. But anyhow, I'm floating that out there as a motion for discussion. Certainly Tom and Carolyn might want to weigh in on this. I know all of us have issues of once we get an understanding and familiarity with these projects, what kind of criteria are we going to use to rank them? What's important? And what are the criteria? How important are they? Do we allow different people to have different priority levels? Is my top priority Tom's middle priority, for example? So these are the kind of things that can come out of a workshop, and this is exactly what we did very successfully, I think probably with an expensive consultant the last time, but we got results fairly quickly with it. So that's my suggestion.
Before I recognize the motion, let's just keep chatting for a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
I'll come back. I hear you. I heard it, but I'm
Yeah,
not going
good,
to recognize
fine.
it quite yet. Tom, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I just am interested in understanding. So the ranking really came from the CAC, or the request for the ranking is the way I understood it. There was a request from the CAC to rank the projects. Maybe you can educate us on what your spirit and intent was, so we can help. We don't want to hold you up, right? But I think Curtis has thought about how we as a team do it. We can have that discussion, but I don't want to do that if it's not going to meet your ultimate goals or what your needs are to move that forward.
Thank you. Well, because of the short turnaround, at least I personally, and Carolyn and I have talked about this as well, was hoping to get feedback from the individual jurisdictions as to their own priorities, those projects that they had submitted. How did they see them in terms of importance, either by categories? Complete streets are the most important thing to us at the city, and these other projects are a little less so. Those kinds of gross rankings, if you will. Understanding that ranking 1 through 108 is a group discussion, and probably several group discussions, frankly, for you to have the kind of conversations that have just been described as being important, and the coordination between the jurisdictions about regional corridors, as an example, that traverse various agencies' requirements. So understanding, as it looks like the memo from Rarhad shows us, is the rankings, if you will, or the importances as each of the individual jurisdictions sees them within their own group of projects would be very helpful to us, certainly at this early stage, because we have so much still to learn and we haven't even developed our own tool or our own system for evaluating these projects, as I believe you haven't either. So those are all steps that occur. It's part of an iterative process as I see it. And I would welcome, and I have talked to a couple of you on this committee already about the request that we made 2 or 3 years ago to have one or more joint meetings with the TMC when the time was appropriate. I'm not saying that we've asked and you haven't answered. It's simply been thrown out there that that's something we think would be very valuable. So the idea of a workshop to talk about these projects and for the CAC to hear some of the technical feedback as well as value-based feedback from jurisdictions about the types and specific corridor projects that are important to them would be invaluable. It would really shorten that time frame, I think, for us to get through all the projects.
Thank you, Sean. Want to add,
Yeah,
Carol?
just really, ditto, and we did expect just the jurisdictions to rank their own projects, and it no longer feels that early in the process, you know, all of a sudden.
1 year is not a lot of time, huh, Carolyn?
Yeah, so the earlier, and I think people are making this a priority, you know, on all of our committees, so I think we could pull it off a joint workshop, or if you all need to do that ahead of time, whatever works for you to have the jurisdictions come together and then start melding those various, you know, within jurisdiction priorities. I think it would be great, and I wouldn't mind going to Italy if we have to have somebody. Yeah, no, but yes.
Thank you, Carol. I want to go to Jan and then Shane.
I promise to stop milking the I'm the new kid in about 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. 29.
One of the things about this idea that would be particularly helpful to me is to understand the connectivity that I look at. You know, I think Mary and others have addressed it. If we have a project that involves 2 jurisdictions and Pima County, and 2 of the jurisdictions have it as number 1 and number 2, and it's 108 for us, well, I need to understand what that means and how everything, it is a regional plan, and how do we take all of our individual preferences and put those together. And I think this kind of working session and really understanding that connectivity could help me inform all of that.
Thank you, Jan. Shane and then Carmen. Yes, I'm just Shane and then Carmen.
Oh, thank you, Shane.
Jan's right.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think what was expressed from the CAC members morphed in terms of the ask to the jurisdictions, to all of the members of the TMC in terms of the rankings. And from the county's perspective, the transmittal letter that accompanied our rankings, I think is important to distribute to everybody so that you can see the approach we took. And given the time frame that we had to do it and 108 projects to prioritize, we looked at congestion, and that's how we ranked it. So we looked at existing volumes compared to existing capacity, and that's how we rank projects. And we said, admittedly, right, new roadway segments don't have that criteria from which to rank them. So we subjectively slotted them in there. So when you look at the input we gave on 108 projects, we did 1, 2, and 3, high, medium, and low prioritization. On the county's 20 projects, we gave you a priority ranking of them, but it's solely based on existing congestion. So the conversation and the output will change given more time to be able to look at those other factors. We heard connectivity regionally. I heard economic vitality, safety, right? The slew of other factors that go into it. The list from the county will look very different the next time we go through an iteration. And I just think that it's important that the transmitting letter that accompanied ours, and I'm sure others explained how they, took on the task, that be shared with all the TMC members so that we can understand how we got what we got from everybody.
Thank you. Comments? Okay.
A lot of ideas being thrown out in terms of our next steps. The town of Sahuarita took the responsibility or the assignment pretty seriously, and and I'd like to think that there's value in the effort that everybody put into it. I mean, we could take that, and I know that PAG took a stab at showing or condensing all that feedback here. So I think there's value there, but I really like the suggestion of having a workshop where we're all together. Maybe it's a day, maybe it's 2 days. You just lock us in a room and we roll up our sleeves, and you slide some food under the door, and we just so we don't pass out. But we get the job done, and we do it together as a group. I think that's really important. I also think it's really important we have our transportation professionals with us. I don't think that we're primed to have that exercise with the CAC right off the bat. My opinion is that we do this as as a management committee, with the aid of our transportation professionals. We figure out what our recommendation is going to be to the CAC. And then we have a workshop with the CAC where we introduce that to them and we explain our line of thinking and how we got to where we got, and then let the CAC ask questions and we provide the answers the best we can and continue to support them as they take that information and start running with it in whatever process that they have to reach that July 1st deadline with the board. That would be my suggestion, but we just get in and roll up our sleeves and do it.
If I may, Mr.
Should we
Chair.
go to Rod and then Rod and Mary? Go ahead, Rod.
So first of all, thank you. I think this conversation is very needed and very appropriate. And I'm pleased that I wasn't the only one beating my head up against the wall while these decisions were going through. I'm very much in favor of the workshop. I struggled with what we were ranking, what the definition of the ranking was. We were looking at projects that, we had a best guess with what period they were going in. There's nothing in period 8. I didn't see anything from certain jurisdictions on what their criteria was. It was just a significant number of holes in this. So I'm very much in favor of a workshop, sitting down, coming up with a method of prioritization. Another issue that we have is some of these projects, and some are not even, there's no planning documents available. So at what level are we, if priority 1 has no planning document, there's no real reasonable expectation they can be done in period 1. So all of these things have to be flushed out and worked through. So I'm very much in favor of a workshop and developing some kind of metric and some kind of system that we can come up with and move this forward.
Thanks, Barb. And Mary. Oh, I'm sorry, did you go on?
I just wanted to let you know that Mr. Lozano has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Terry, I'll come to you after Mary.
Okay, well, thank you. He's on here, but for some reason we can't get him over.
Terry, can you speak up on your microphone just to make sure we can hear you? Do you mind if we-
Yeah, go ahead, testify.
Are you able to hear me?
We are. Go ahead, Terry. We're gonna go ahead and go to you, then we'll come before I.
Okay.
I apologize. I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, no problem. So I can appreciate all the comments that have been made by the last 4 or 5 people talking about the difficulty in trying to rake projects that you're not familiar with. I'll be honest, we had, pretty spirited discussion and debate amongst our own staff with regard to our own projects. So trying to rank projects that we weren't familiar with. I think some of them, somebody mentioned Colossal Cave. We had a pretty big discussion about that. What's the regional impact of that? And, we came up with our own criteria, for better or for worse. We came up with our own criteria and did the best we could to try and put them in different bands. We didn't so much go, 1 through 108, but we put them in bands in terms of priority. So I would certainly be in favor. I heard it from Mary. I heard it from a number of other people. I heard it from Shane. I would certainly be in favor of sitting in a room. I don't want my door shoved under or my food shoved under a door, but I would probably like to sit in a room with everybody and kind of hash out where the priorities are.
Thank you, Terry. I'm going to go to Farhad, then Mary, and I'll come back to you.
Sure. So thank you again. So again, I'm actually really pleased to hear some of the comments, some of the conversations I had with individuals. We all recognized early on that this is going to be challenging. And obviously we expressed our understanding of the challenge.
Your condolences.
we all know it's challenging. I don't think anybody around this table can assume that it's going to be an easy task. But we invite you to come to the table and maybe at the next August meeting, we can have a longer conversation and really start putting those building blocks together. I don't think anybody assumed that this is the first, kind of the first and the final list. This was really intended to get the conversations going. I'm glad to see that we're achieving that. So now next time it's up to you all. I think our next meeting in August, we can schedule it for a longer period of time. And to respond to that presentation, that really the intent was to have individuals to come in, present and talk about their concept, their ideas, how they came about with their recommendations. But you really had to go through this exercise, at least in our opinion, to get to this point. So now we can go to the next step. I don't think anybody assumed that we're gonna finish this just with one exercise. It's gonna be a multi-step process. So my recommendation is to use your next meeting for this purpose, and we'll block as many hours as you like and have that conversation at the next meeting. Bring jurisdictional staff to present and have that conversation.
Or Mary, and then what?
Yeah, couple of things. I respectfully disagree with that approach, Farha. I think that we need to set aside an entire day sometime in early September, give our teams a chance to think about this. Yes, we can use the next meeting to perhaps create what we want in terms of how we want the workshop to be structured, but I think we need a whole day. I agree with you, Shane. And I think the other thing that also this group needs to be thinking about, yes, we need to be looking at the transportation piece, but ultimately our goal is we want this to get approved by voters, right? So it's also our job to be thinking about how are we going to make sure that our voters vote for it, okay? So one of the things, and I think I didn't ask my question earlier about, is the CAC going to get information on where the dollars are coming from, right? For example, I can tell you that people in Oro Valley vote, people in Marana vote. And we need to take that into consideration and make sure that in addition to the connectivity and that kind of thing, that we're making sure that a little bit gets everywhere across the entire region. That's part of our job. If we don't, yes, I agree, there are some major issues that need to be addressed. They might be very, very expensive. But if we don't spread the wealth out and make sure Sahuarita gets its share, and Oro Valley gets its share, and Marana gets its share, and Tucson, which will need the lion's share, let's face it, and then the county, which we all use, and we use that as part of our conversation, we're going to fail at this because that's part of it's part of how we get everybody on board in terms of the region. That doesn't mean, we don't think about hopefully all those will float to the top, but it needs to be part of our conversation, and it should be part of our conversation at the workshop as well. And so my request, of course, is where are those dollars generated from? Not just where are they going and what's the total, but where are they generated from? If we have that generally, maybe it doesn't have to be down to the gnat's ass or anything, but at least if we have kind of a general distribution as far as where those dollars are going to be generated. And then I had one more thing, but I totally lost it. Oh, the last thing I wanted to mention, Tom and Carolyn. I'm so happy to hear from both of you that you don't feel that this work of the transportation professionals and the leadership here at this group in terms of kind of doing that first cut and that analysis is doing your job for you, that you view it as an assistance to the CAC and not us doing your work instead of you. And that then I agree that the next phase then is that collaboration with the CAC where we can say, hey, we've taken a first crack and here's that sheet of paper that we would now want to go over with you instead of, hey, here's a list of all these projects, knock yourselves out. People who have no background in transportation or local government, but bring valuable input in terms of the political issues and the sharing and all of the other things that are so important, the representation of our voters. I think that is absolutely critical. So thank you for that feedback. I think that helps meld our conversation in a direction where we want to go. I recommend that we need a little time to get a whole day on our schedule. And so if we can plan for that and just look for a day in early September and use the next meeting to plan for how do we want to handle it, what's the structure, who's going to facilitate, where do we want to meet, all of that kind of stuff, so that it's not, I was mentioning to Farhad earlier, I'm like, this sitting around this ginormous table doesn't feel conducive to true collaboration. What can we do differently? Have little groups together, just like you would a workshop where you facilitate. I think we can still do that, make it public meeting, and meet all of the requirements of the open meeting law. We do that with our councils and take them for strategic planning for 2 days offsite, and it still meets all of the requirements. I think we can do that with this group as well. Thank you, Mr.
Mary,
Chair.
what, do you have a?
I did. I have kind of a question. While I was going through this process, ADOT's jurisdiction crosses just about everybody's. We interact with everybody at some point. So looking at the individual regions' priorities, which was the first time I've seen them, and then correlating it a little bit with our priorities, certainly puts some enlightenment on how our priorities might be shifted and related. So the question I have, is there an opportunity for some of the agencies to either add or modify to their project list at this point?
Yeah, of course. And if you recall, Rick actually was the point of contact and coordinating with everyone and tried to make those refinements and adjustments, coordinating between jurisdictions, especially if we had projects that cross multiple jurisdictions. Yeah, feel free to coordinate with Rick directly and we'll just make the adjustments and just update it as we go. And that applies to all jurisdictions.
How much time does the CAC think they need to go through the public process? Is that public process needed to have something to recommend to the board on
Let me
July
clarify,
1st?
if I think I understand your question, is after draft plan is completed, the goal would be for the board to go through a public process to obtain feedback
Not CAC.
and then make a decision. That's at that point, the board will recommend any changes to that draft plan. And
So it's not the CAC that's going through
not
the
at
public
that point,
process?
it's the board.
Okay, thank you. So how long do we think it would take for us to get to that one list, Mike, that is our goal in working with the CAC? Do we think that
It's really up to you all. I mean,
Well,
like, again, if you
but
decide to do it in one day, that would be
No.
productive. If
I
not,
think
well,
one day for us, but then we have to present to CAC and we have to go through a back and forth, a process to come up with a list if we can get there, and that's our goal.
Yeah.
How long do you think we'd take for that?
My gut would be several months, is my gut, just based on gathering TMC, figuring out draft of the draft plan. CAC doing something similar, comparing those and going through that exercise. I can see that taking months. I think a goal could be the end of the calendar year to have the framework for a draft plan. I'm not speaking for you, I'm just thinking logistics of getting that. So that means there's meetings in September, October, November, and December. That's 4 months of us working together to try to identify some of that. I think that could, and again, I'm just going back to the iterative process that I would expect we would take this.
And Mr. Chair, what role does the guiding principles play in all of this? As an agency, when we went through this list of 108 projects, Beth and I, we weren't saying, okay, what are these guiding principles? And we were thinking traffic congestion, right? We were thinking, okay, when the voter looks at this, they're feeling pain. They're feeling like, hey, it takes me forever to get from A to B. And if I'm going to put my money somewhere, it's because it's making that easier for me to get there, whether it's biking or it's transit or it's in their car, however they travel, that's what's on their minds. And so in our vetting of these projects, we really focused on capacity enhancements or new road corridors that made regional sense, kind of thing. Are these guiding principles, what role did they play in this process? And if it's significant, then perhaps that needs to be our first effort, is is finalizing these guiding principles. And then we come together as a TMC and traffic professional group to get to our recommendation to the CAC. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And that's why I focused on the schedule,
Yeah.
because the guiding principles is the August conversation that the CAC needs to have to get ready for the RTA board. So I think you're right on target in terms of us weighing into a level that incorporates this conversation and gets them ready. So,
Mr. Chair, if I may just add to that, and Tom touched on it, and that's mostly for the benefit of folks that weren't here at the time. So the guiding principles really evolved as part of the CAC's kind of let's outline our vision. So it's a tool for the CAC that was only adopted by the CAC, and that CAC obtained feedback from the TMC as well as they did a survey, got some additional feedback. But the guiding principles were not adopted by TMC or the board. They're purely a tool for the CAC.
So if our goal, respectfully, if our goal is to have one list, then we could be recommending something that's completely off mark from the guiding principles. And if the guiding principles is the CAC's lens, then we could really, I mean, it might take more than several months to get there, right? Or we might be in a scenario where we're, as a management group, we're recommending a list and CAC's recommending a list and making it real tough for our board to make a decision there.
You're correct. And if I may add, so last time around, TMC provided some minor comments on the individual basis. The future restrictions had comments before it was adopted by the CAC. This time around, we hope to bring it back again and you provide your individual comments again. But yeah, point well taken. So somehow we need to make sure that they have your perspective.
So I'm thinking process, Mr. Chair, if I might continue, I appreciate the opportunity, but so if our goal is to figure out some point in early September for this day retreat for this group, then our efforts really ought to be with CAC finalizing these guiding principles and allowing the management committee to weigh in and get to that point where once we get together in September, we understand what those guiding principles are and we can use that lens to help try to be successful when we get back to the CAC.
So I think the key then is maybe it's all hands on deck for August to weigh in on the guiding principles for the CAC. This group, all hands on deck for the CAC or for the guiding principles, our commentary, if you will, for CAC to help inform that.
Yeah.
But I'll explore that a little further in terms of, because your commentary is exactly, I think, the purposes, TMC Technical Management Committee. I can see a scenario where we may disagree based on a technical lens from a citizens group, and that's okay. We will make that recommendation in the spirit of, hey, please consider this as a part of our perspective in the region. And then it goes back into Mary's points about what's going to resonate with the voter. So I think all of those lenses are going to be part of that evolution. And it could very well be that there is a project or two that are recommended by the technical management committee because of, and then we outline it. So I think could help. Let me go to Baki. She's been very patient, then I'll come to you, Carmen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to add a few things. First of all, we're in the process of drafting, the kind of figure out. But if it helps you, we currently have the CAC is currently scheduled right now to meet every first Monday of the month, and then the third is needed, just to help you as you move forward. There has been discussion about merging the two groups later. Also, knowing that the draft plan is due July 1st of next year, if you think about if you have July to December, for example, I'm not setting any dates now. Keep in mind that we don't have an election date yet set. So I think that's going to move the process once the board provides an election date. But in the meantime, I think that July to December of next year will be the opportunity to go out to the extensive public outreach where you'll get all of that feedback. And then you'll determine, what the voters might be wanting at that time. The other thing is just to Mr. Dilly to address the guiding principles. One of the reasons that the initial CAC came up with those, and the goals is to build some sort of, not criteria, but a foundation for what the RTA plan next would look like. So what this current CAC is looking at is just possibly adding additional principles, maybe some goals that they feel could also be incorporated without, breaking any statutes or policies, but just looking at some additional items that could be used with the current project submittals. So it's just more of a foundation, if you will.
And the better the TMC understands those guiding principles, I think the better we have success in reaching one.
Thank you.
Yes, so I was just gonna say so just to wrap up the CAC meetings, the next one is July 18th, then have another one August 1st, and then they have a one 2 weeks after that. So that will be the last one before they submit, their output to the board. So during that time, there'll be opportunity for the teams to weigh in. In the meantime, they're also starting to review the projects, not rank them, just starting to review the projects and start to get acquainted with them, looking at the maps and where they're located. Just wanted to kind of give you an overall of what's happening in the next month, remainder of the year.
Thank you, appreciate it, Carl.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to suggest that on the guiding principles, if we run things in parallel, it could help to get us to the endpoint sooner, right? So rather than the TMC members waiting for the revised set of guiding principles to comment, is it appropriate for us as members of TMC in the jurisdictions to go back to the already approved guiding principles and give you input, Tom and Carolyn, give you that input now, so that as you're taking the input from the members of the CAC, you see also those thoughts from the TMC, and then those are reflected, both of those are reflected in the draft when the TMC sees it.
I'm not sure I understood, Carmine, are you saying go back and re-review the existing guiding principles?
So the input from TMC members and the jurisdictions has been some time ago, and that resulted in the current set of adopted guiding principles. So what I was suggesting is we could go back as TMC members and jurisdictions, review those, give you input that you can factor in along with the discussions of your CAC in coming up with the revision to it, so that we're not waiting between now and whenever it is the CAC puts forth its next draft of recommended guiding principles. So we run them in parallel rather than in series. So
Another possibility could be to take a look at the draft as it is now. I hesitate to do that because the committee hasn't really acted on any of these suggested changes yet.
When do you expect them to act?
Well, we'll start acting on it at our meeting in 12 days or whatever it is.
Just out of curiosity, is there an opportunity for, at that meeting, to ask them to act, at least to give it to the TMC, even if they're not finally approved, but just to get them comfortable that, to Carmine's, it's not exactly parallel, but maybe it's a little bit staggered?
So I was just going to suggest that it's up to you. CAC chair is up to you, but it looks like it's coming together that at the next meeting, hopefully that's the opportunity to submit a revised draft version for review and comment at that time, but it's up to you.
Yeah, I think that makes a little more sense to me and feels a little less risky as far as the product you're going to be reviewing. I don't want you to have to really review two products that might be fairly disparate. So appreciate that.
So, go ahead, Carl.
Just in addition, I wanted to echo what Mike said, that there weren't suggestions to totally revamp it. There were a couple of very specific ideas of language that was missing the last time, particularly things like climate change and equity. I don't think they're big. So if we could wait until that, and there might be a couple other suggestions that come up, and we'll have, I think, a pretty good discussion next time. But that's only not that long from now on the 18th. That I think that would be good. In addition, this iterative, even if the iterative goes back and forth more quickly, because of the time constraints. I think that's going to be so helpful. Because the last thing that we want to do is have two competing lists. I mean, I think that would, that would be helpful for voters or for any of us. But I wanted to mainly say, when we started this discussion, we were talking about having a joint workshop. And if there's going to be a whole day, I think that our committee members would be really well served to be involved, if possible, in September. That will be after the guiding principles, and it will be with all the transportation professionals there. They're going to be explaining how they got to where they are. And, we could just watch, of course, as members of the public, but it might be a good time to have that first joint workshop.
Very good.
Can I modify my budding motion? Really want to wait.
1 second, let me make a few other comments and then I'll.
Okay.
So that's a great thought there, Carolyn. I think that I would even suggest that rather than the CAC attend as members of the public, that it be a joint CAC TMC working together and demonstrate the partnership, but also give them an opportunity to weigh in, as a part of a formally advertised and noticed meeting. So it's a thought. So a couple of thoughts. First of all, I appreciate everybody's commentary. I think it was excellent. I think that was the spirit in which I had hoped we would all bring our thoughts and ideas. So I'm I guess a little bit of on an island because our staff was beating their heads against the wall. And I asked them, what are you doing? And they're, well, beating our heads against the wall, trying to figure out how we're going to rank 100-day projects. And I said, stop. We're not doing that until we have this discussion. So we did not submit based on that. I said it would be not a good use of their time. Tom, I wish I would have asked you at the last meeting what your intent was so that you could have told us just the jurisdictions, we'd all be done. If that was if I'd understood that, we understood it was 108 projects. So that makes it a lot easier and a lot more straightforward. A couple of things that I picked up that we might want to think about and consider as we go forward. So as we're talking about the revenues for a new ask for the RTA next, I think the overlap is an important piece from this perspective. If we go to the voter and we say to them, we would like you to consider an extension of RTA, right? That language is real important because that tells the voter potentially that at the end of 26, the new tax, which is an extension, continues, right? So that's different. If we go in 24 and we're asking for an overlap of a half cent, right? All of a sudden, that's a whole different discussion. The chemistry changes. And by the way, I'm not suggesting one's better than the other. I'm just suggesting that as we're talking about the schedule for projects and the approach to moving projects, the delivery of the RTA1, those are extremely important pieces. But I think sooner rather than later, we need to have a discussion with this group to make a recommendation. Again, not to delve into the politics around the voter approval, but more of the logistics of delivery, because I think that our messaging to the public will be extremely important in either one of those two scenarios. I think, hope you don't mind me saying, Jen and I had an agenda discussion about a potential approach to this whole exercise, right? And although I appreciate from where the revenue is generated, but I think that's one layer. I think the other layers are need congestion, where things are falling apart and we need to have a conversation around, hey, it's not serving the current need. Let's have a discussion around that so that if we approach it in a layered manner, as opposed to here's just the criteria and we're going to try to put it all into one piece. Because I do think that ultimately there will be some, hey, we recommend from a technical standpoint this, but the reality is that's probably not going to rank high because of some other constraints or some other feedback that we're going to get. And I think the sooner that we start talking through that, again, I don't know that we have to define it right this minute or even in a workshop right away, But I do think that those magnitude of those conversations is huge, because that changes the potential trajectory for us, both in terms of conversation about RTA 1, as well as what that looks like in RTA next. And so I would suggest to you to be thinking about that as we go forward. Go ahead, Shane.
Mr. Chair, it is that very reason, the things that you just brought up, the layers that need to be applied to our recommendation to the CAC. It's those things that compel me to continue to press for a dedicated work session day for the TMC and the technical folks. It's not to usurp or work around a very important process that we have yet ahead of us in working with the CAC. But until we can come together as a TMC and have that conversation, I just think about adding another 30 people to this conversation and starting from scratch. I don't think that's the ingredient for success. I think if we come together as a TMC and professional technical staff, work through these things, understand what our message is, that's a foundation upon which the CAC can come and add color and other other points of interest to that, so that we can start working together on a recommendation of the board. So it depends on what this motion really is, but I may or may not be in support of it.
I haven't accepted it yet. So
Okay.
Small movements of the chair. So let me just kind of keep thinking, because I'm thinking out loud on that. I think that the process is extremely important to all of us. And I'm not just saying the usual, right? The politically correct things that you have to have process. I think it has to be in a way that resonates with the stakeholders, and the stakeholders include, and then just go down the list, right? Because if we don't, then we're going to have potentially some groups that are splinter off, and then we have all sorts of problems down the road, right? And no one wants to see that. And so I think that you're spot on, Shane, in that I'll say we get our ducks in a row in a way that is defensible, and I don't mean defensible in a negative way, but really we can show and demonstrate, hey, these are some thoughts that we didn't just say, hey, these are take a 20-minute opportunity. I mean, it's truly getting into the criteria and thought and very meaningful discussion and dialogue that then gives us an opportunity to do that. So I would suggest this, and then I'll open it to motion. I would suggest, and there is an item, TMC meeting schedule and frequency, and we'll talk item number 6. We're still only on item 4, but what I would suggest in the context of the RTA Next plan, that we schedule meetings, one in August and then one in September. And the August meeting is specifically to focus on the guiding principles, kind of all hands on deck there. And we can rethink some of this discussion and bring that forward and have a discussion there. And then September, we craft a day or some extended period of time for us to roll up our sleeves and delve into what that's going to look like going forward.
So that being the TMC?
Yeah, I'm talking the TMC. However, I think that there's value in thinking between now and then of an opportunity for the CAC to participate somehow. I'm not necessarily suggesting anything more than just making sure that there is a recognition of us working together with the CAC. That's all I'm suggesting.
So my thought, though, and it was, I mean, Tom and Carolyn are here representing the CAC and can be that conduit in the interim. But I really feel like, you add on a lot of different inputs, it's really going to complicate our ability to reach that foundation.
Make it harder.
It will. I'm
opening the conversation. Tom, before Jim, I'm sorry, I think you had your hand up. I didn't call.
I appreciate it. No, I think everything I was going to say has already been said, so I don't want to reiterate it. But I think one of the values of this process that I went through looking at 108 projects is this is a heavy lift over a year, very heavy lift. And what I was wondering is if it would make sense to put some interim milestones in place. I think, Carolyn, you mentioned something about December. We'd like to have a draft plan in place. That's good. That gives us something that we need to start working towards as we establish meetings, as we establish workshops. You want feedback from the TMC, you need feedback from the TMC. If you can start identifying what that would be earlier, we can start getting that in place, setting up the meetings that we need and getting the feedback that we need, that we can get to you in a timely manner. Because what I'm worried about is we're going to plod along productively, but we're not going to make enough progress so that we can meet that July 1 deadline that we're shooting for. Because in looking at those tasks, just identifying a draft plan is step one. Step two is to then, look at the funding. How do we want to break the funding up? We haven't even talked about categorical funding yet. We have item 5, which is RTA 1, what projects are going to move forward? How does that feed into what you're going to do? And then Mary, you made a very important point. How do we pick projects that are going to resonate with voters so that we move this forward successfully? So if we can start thinking a little bit about interim milestones and your needs from this group, I think we could be more efficient and more effective in how we deliberate and how we provide feedback.
No, raise your hand and then,
Not going on.
like what I was saying, so I didn't forgot about it. I apologize. So,
Well, first of all, I do want to thank you for inviting us to this meeting. It's been really helpful, particularly for one of the things that Jim just discussed, and that's a master schedule, if you will. I've been working on that and realizing that I can't really do it without some of the feedback I heard today and understanding kind of what a schedule might look like for you as well, because they have to mesh. So if I could make a suggestion, perhaps the chairs of the two committees could converse, maybe just a phone call to talk about how that schedule might interact. I have enough information today that I can start working on that with some help from staff as to logistics and perhaps our chairs talking about this master schedule. We could come with something that is our schedule, not just CAC, but TMC and CAC. So I think that's important. My last comment for now, I guess, is that I do think that inviting the CAC, because I know these people, and it's going to be everything you can do, I think, to take on the task you have, but to add in the comments and the inputs from the CAC at a time when you're just trying to deal with your own technical levels of prioritization, I think is too much for the first get together of your workshop. So I'd be happy to attend and perhaps provide some of that color as it goes, and I'm sure Carolyn and Mary would as well. So that as you're having these discussions, perhaps we can toss in some of that color as it was described before as to how the CAC will be ranking and looking at priorities because of their guiding principles.
Just to add to that, if I may, I'm sorry, just as long as we're talking about that. So I believe everybody knows this, but just to make sure everybody hopefully recognizes. So the 3 officers from the CAC are liaisons to the TMC. They're invited to attend all TMC meetings. And then vice versa, Terry and John Bernal are liaisons from TMC to CAC, and they attend most, if not all, of the CAC meetings as well.
So I will add, on future agendas, you'll actually see CAC report, the CAC chair report, because I think it's important to formalize that, to give you the floor to educate us on what's going on at the CAC. So, and I would hope that there's something similar on the CAC side for Terry and John. So, go ahead, Mary.
I was just gonna say, Tom, I love your idea of setting those milestones and, you know, identifying what needs to be, Jim, you know, like what needs to be done when, that sort of thing. And I think even hearing from you in terms of, we have just us here and our professionals in transportation. We got a lot of work cut out, even to just get done in one day, if we're gonna plan that ahead for September. It's a lot. So it's gonna have to be well structured for sure. But maybe what we can do in putting those milestones together, because the CAC is filled with other professionals with other jobs, right? And so identifying on the schedule a day for another joint work session, maybe, you know, maybe it's the end of October, maybe it's the beginning of November, and like we just pencil it in and we use that to say, so everybody can get it, put it on their calendar and get as much participation as possible. Hey, set aside a whole day. We'll give you details later, but put it on your calendar. Then they know it's coming. They know that we're, you know, making progress, and then all of these different milestones along the way, Jim, that you mentioned. What has to happen by when in order for us to get this all accomplished? And I know part of that has already been done. Staff has been working with the CAC, and so there is that, but I think we need to go down into a little bit more detail on that, particularly in light of this conversation about, you know, okay, well, what happens when, you know, after September, and we come up with some concepts, you know, we've got questions, you know, like what has to happen in between there. So I really like that idea, but certainly giving everybody as much advance notice to put things on their calendar would be helpful to them.
Oh, go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, I think now the comments have probably already been made, but I'll state in concurrence with Tom and I think Shane and Mary as well, that I think in order for us to make progress on this, a joint meeting would be really difficult. I don't think that we'd make progress with that many people sitting in the room, having attended many of the CAC meetings. It's difficult. I admire Tom very much for the work that he does in keeping those meetings going. But I think with all of us trying to accomplish prioritizing, in addition to taking comments from the CAC, it would be a really difficult task. So I would recommend that we keep that initial meeting to something that's just the TMC members.
Okay, thanks, Terry, appreciate it. So I wrote down 3 things that we could start thinking about for our August meeting, and we haven't discussed the date, but the first would be not necessarily priority, just number 8, an item is the guiding principles. I think at that point, we would have already provided feedback, but we could talk through whatever commentary as a team, as a group. 2, I like the term master schedule. I think that's a great idea, and I think that the TMC should weigh in on that. Tom, I think if you could craft that, I mean, we can work together, but I think that would set the stage from now to July 1. You know, July 1's kind of the date, but we work backwards at all the milestones. We'll call July 1 the final exam, and all the others are midterms. But there's some opportunity, I think, to do something there that would set the stage for what the expectations are, and quite frankly, the accountability around that. The other thing is, I would suggest that at the August meeting, we talk about the structure for a day away. And I like your thought, Mary, that it needs to be thought through and structured so that we can have at least an understanding of what we're going to do, what the expectations are, what the outcomes are that we're projecting and proposing out there. That'd be my suggestion. Under the, as I mentioned earlier, under item 6, all I'm going to do is recommend that we meet monthly, but I'll defer for that discussion, but I would suggest that the next two meetings for specifically RTA Next would be in August, and then one in September would be the day away. So that's what I'm kind of hearing as the general agenda for the August meeting. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to the good doctor to guide us on a motion if appropriate.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was an excellent discussion. I really had no idea what to expect today, but I think we're making tremendous progress. That said, I'd like to have Julie read back what we just talked about.
Great idea.
I should have warned you. So, yeah, I'd like to move that the TMC hold a workshop to basically study the projects with presentations from the jurisdictions on a target date of Wednesday, September 14th, just so we have something on the schedule. And that in advance of that, as our chair mentioned, at our next meeting after this, we would flesh out some of the details of that. And I would also move that the chair establish a small group of the TMC to work a little bit more concentrated on that with staff. And it might be myself and Mr. Bernal, whoever wants to be. You can decide who that might be, Mike, and that we move forward with this.
That's the structure of the day away.
Yes. Okay.
I'll second that with one minor modification, which is instead of identifying a date certain, can we just say a September date based on the best availability and participation, just in case?
Oh, sure. A Wednesday in the middle of September, something, whatever.
Wednesday the second.
Yeah, that's fine. I
Just
accept
in
that.
case.
All right, we'll ask
Just in
folks to
case.
make sure we get a date that works for majority.
Yeah.
There's a motion with a modified and a second. Further discussion. Seeing none, we'll call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So we'll establish a date for August that hopefully everybody will work on. Mr. Chair.
For September. For September.
No, but August for our next meeting of the TMC is August. And then the August meeting, as I mentioned, will be those three items, one of which will be to finalize the format for the September.
So you're already holding that date.
But let's get a date on our calendars as soon as possible. for September.
What's the August meeting date? Do you have it on? Yeah, so you already have August
Date is-
meeting date.
That's okay.
August.
We'll
Is it
find
the
out.
third Wednesday for management?
I think it's a second.
All right, whatever that August meeting is, that's going to be.
That's,
The 10th.
that's already under schedule.
Yeah.
Thank
Mr. Chair, I just had a quick question for Farhad.
you. Yes.
Relative to our scheduling this master calendar thing, are we anticipating on having a consultant, like a public affairs type consultant, help us with the election strategy?
Yes, definitely. That's all part of the plan. So between now and July 1, the board will most likely go through an RFP process and select someone to help with that.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on that? We'll move on to, now, we move on to item 5. So this is the approach for completion of RTA, of the remaining RTA projects. I'm not sure that we need to get into a lot of detail here. I know, Jim, you're ready to roll there. My interest and intent there is only as it relates to delivery of the program, which goes back to all the conversation we just had with regard to the RTA Next, because I think in order to be successful there, we're going to have to demonstrate delivery of RTA 1. That was the spirit in which I added that. My gut is that that's probably going to be part of the conversation that we have in September as to how do we approach the delivery of RTA 1. So I'll open it up if you all want to chat about that. That was the spirit and intent that I had put this on. Do any of the committee members want to get into any detail there, or do you want to have a conversation around it as a part of the day away?
I think it can wait.
Yeah. Seeing no, everybody seems okay with that. Jim, thanks for all the preparation. You're amazing.
I'm glad I'm not going to disappoint with what I was going to say.
That worked out well. I think the key there is, again, in the spirit of delivery to set up success for RTA. We'll move on to item 6, which is the meeting schedule and frequency. Again, as I mentioned earlier, my suggestion is that we meet monthly for the foreseeable future, just to make sure that we get through all of the stuff that we talked about. Rehash any of that. I don't know what your preference is in terms of a day of the week that might work better for TMC members or not. I know we have the second Wednesday is PAG/RTA, TMC, that's already scheduled quarterly. If that works for most folks, we can leave it on Wednesday mornings and then just find others during the months, at least at the end of the calendar year, we'll say. Is everybody okay with that? Generally, if we just start scheduling those, I think that part of that will be the master schedule as well, and we'll identify those as well.
As long as I know, right, schedule around it.
So that's the game plan at this point.
So is that monthly?
Monthly is, for now, it'll be the second. So it's the second Wednesday.
Second Wednesday of the month, 9 o'clock, if that works for you.
Yes, second Wednesday of the month, starting in August. The only one that might vary will be September 1st month. September for the day away. We may change that date a little bit just based on people's schedules for that. Okay. All right, so you'll see that start showing up, and we'll get that notice out pretty quickly. Okay.
Mr. Chair, one thought is on the day away. In my opinion, I don't know if that necessarily needs to completely blend with our regular monthly schedule. I mean, it can, but it doesn't have to. I'm open to it being, we just have 2 meetings. There might quite frankly be other business that we need to take care of. And I would rather not have normal business jump in and overlap the task at hand for this day workshop. So I'm open to that if the rest of the group is.
If you don't mind, we'll send you some dates to make sure we don't have a conflict with any other meetings, and that hopefully the majority can pick a date. That would be the date to go with.
For the day away.
For the
not
workshops,
so
for the workshop. So you don't need a regular September meeting, you just need the workshop. in
Well,
September.
what I just outlined
Or
is,
did you need both?
let's leave it on the schedule.
Okay.
If there's nothing on
Got it.
or important, then we can cancel
Got
that. Okay, so there could be 2.
I just suggested that Janine doodle poll.
Yeah,
So
great.
that'll be helpful.
All right, and then we'll move on to future agenda items. This is an item that I suggested we put on all agendas so that especially if we're meeting monthly, to make sure we're kept in real time with what the members are thinking in terms of thoughts that they want to bring forward at a future meeting, either the next meeting or some future meeting. Are there any topics that you would like considered at the next meeting or at future meetings? Dr.
Yeah,
Lewis?
Mr. Chair, I do have a long list,
Okay.
but I realize that we have a lot on our plate right now, so I'm only going to mention one of them.
Okay.
And that is for the committee to review the bylaws. The bylaws were last updated in 2015. They really don't reflect embarking on this RTA next plan. There are some reconfirmations in there. One of them would be that the TMC matters are supposed to be presented to the RTA board by the chair or the vice chair. So hopefully you and Jan left already. I think she knew.
I'm done. I'm out of here.
Yeah, that happened. And I think importantly to consider having designees for the jurisdictional members as an alternate, because with vacation schedules and illnesses and COVID and all of that, it would be important to do that, particularly for getting a quorum as well, since the non-jurisdictional members aren't there. So I would suggest, it doesn't happen on our next meeting, but I would suggest sometime by the end of the year, Mr. Chair, that we take a look at the bylaws and be prepared to discuss them and see what needs updating. The other thing is the membership itself on the TMC, to make sure that the membership list is up to date and that we have the appropriate people on the committee.
Other items for future agendas? Thank you. So we'll see what the schedule looks
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, no rush, Mr. Chair.
Without objection, we will stand adjourned unless someone has something else to do the order. Adjourn promptly at. Thank you all, appreciate it. Thank you. You demonstrated some leadership.